Shalom. We're going to invite to the Bimah, our guest speaker for this morning, Shira Wallach, who will be joining us, and welcome her. Shira is the next guest, please. The next guest in our series. The next guest in our series of which is entitled "Young Voices: Today's Topics." And as we have been exposed to some interesting thoughts and ideas from some younger people in our community, you recall that a few weeks ago, Danya shared with us some ideas about the impact of advocacy for Israel through the medium of social media. You recall that a couple of weeks ago, we had the opportunity to welcome Eliana Fisher, who spoke to us about the recognition of people with disabilities and what that means in creating a just and Torah-based and true society. So in many ways, today's topic is a great concern to so many of us, that it has really been the main focus of so many news feeds. And it has been the central focus of, I think, in many ways in the United States, where and how anti-Semitism is experienced by our people. Now, that's not entirely true. That's certainly a broad stroke type of description. But the work that Shira is doing, that she's going to share with us, I think will sound so familiar to you. And I'm going just to ask her some questions, and hopefully we will have some time to share. So first of all, it's lovely to meet you. We're thrilled to have Shira here. And Shira, just as ways of introduction, if you could share just a couple of minutes of your own biography, personal biography.
Sure. Yeah, it's great to be here with everyone. Shabbat Shalom. My name is Shira. I am the Chief Leadership Officer at the Israel on Campus Coalition, which I'll tell you more about in a second. But I was born in Tampa, Florida. Grew up in a conservative, Jewish household, Shabbat observant, always very connected to Israel. Things were easier back then. But I grew up going to Camp Bimah, where, I got married a few weeks ago, actually, and I think like 30 people, 30, 40 of my friends from Camp Bimah were there, and that's been something that's like been a huge part of my connection to Judaism and Israel and so on and so forth. Still to this day, I worked there for some time, and then I spent some time living in Israel, where I got my master's at Hebrew University in nonprofit management and leadership. And then I moved to New York about a little over 4 years ago and started working at the organization of today, ICC for short. Yeah.
Good. So the Israel Campus Coalition does some fantastic work, which you're going to share with our group. Just for our own knowledge, it's according to the website that ICC, for which Shira is the main representative, they engage over 80,000 students throughout the United States. So we're not talking about just a small point of contact, but the work that they do is impacting 80,000 students. They refer to them as, whether on-campus professionals, pro-Israel community organizations, etc. And it says that today the ICC leads the pro-Israel campus movement in the United States. And by the way, that's a pretty heavy responsibility. So I want to ask you the question just to begin with, as this is all like literally blown up in our faces, and I apologize for using that terminology, but tell me, how has your work changed? Specifically, how has your work changed since October 7th?
Sure. So just to take like a step back for a quick second to give some context as to how ICC came to be. ICC was founded in the early 2000s under the auspices of the Charles Lynn Schuster Family Philanthropies and Hillel International. So ICC began really as this branch of Hillel International, which I assume most people here are familiar with, really with the main initiative and goal to help the pro-Israel campus community become more strategic and well-coordinated. And so ICC, the reason the word coalition is in the name is because still to this day, a big piece of what our organization does is help to convene and strategize with the many campus organizations that exist, right? I'm sure everyone here can name many, many other organizations that do work that sounds very similar to this. But what was happening in the early 2000s, and it's still difficult to, for things from the outside to see coordinated, was there was this organization and this organization kind of just off siloed doing their own thing, and nobody even knew who each other were. So the Schusterman Family Philanthropies and Hill International came together and said, you know, we need to create a way for all of these different nonprofits and players in this game to be more well coordinated, and that's where ICC came into the title. In 2011, ICC became its own independent registered 501c3. And then a few short years later, after the war in 2014, ICC not only continued to be a convener, but became operational in the sense that we do much more of the kinds of work we do today, where we work directly with students on campus. We have a very large research operation and a digital operation as well. As we all know, like we started saying, and I know Danya spoke about, you know, the way anti-Semitism manifests online in the digital space. You just can't ignore that in today's age, and so that's a huge piece of what we do today as well.
Tell me in your work on the ground, tell us whether or not people on college campuses, tell us how they use and or distinguish the terms anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
Sure. Well, so in one sentence, answer your question before about that, because I didn't really answer it, sorry, about how the work has changed since October 7th. The truth is, like, a lot of this chaos that we're all seeing now was already happening in smaller, you know, not quite as extreme and in our faces as it's happening now. And the media also wasn't picking it up in the way it has since October 7th. But these kinds of scary stories you hear about professors doing X, Y, and Z and students doing things that sound pretty egregious and outrageous were already happening, and ICC was at the forefront of, you know, responding to those situations and providing resources to both students and faculty on campuses to respond in an effective manner that helps protect the Jewish community. But since October 7th, I mean, we have just seen an absolute influx, an absolute uproar of chaos, marginalization against the Jewish community. And on the flip side, and like trying to turn a positive light to it, we've had such increased support from our stakeholders and from community members, and you know, from the, you know, mainstream Jewish community at large, that is really realizing how significant of an issue this is. And so when people always ask this question, right? Like, what is the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? And I think that's something that is exactly what, you know, the professional anti-Israel movement wants us to be asking ourselves, because their goals since about 2014 have been to drive a wedge between Judaism and Zionism, and to create as much space as possible between these two terms, to almost make Jewish people who identify as Zionists themselves question, are these related? Are these the same thing, right? But I think it goes without saying that you cannot disconnect Judaism from Zionism from the land of Israel. I don't know how many mitzvot off the top of my head, you might be better at this. How many of our 613 mitzvot, you know, are we asked to fulfill within the land of Israel? How often do we pray for rain in the land of Israel? When we finish the Passover Seder, we say Lashana Haba Ben Yerushalayim. Our Jewish holidays are connected to the agricultural cycle in the land of Israel. I mean, there's just simply no question, if we're just talking about facts, that Zionism is an integral part of Judaism. That doesn't mean that every Jewish person is a Zionist, right? If you choose to sever that part of your Jewish identity, that's up to you, but that doesn't mean that Zionism isn't part of Judaism. The same way, if there is a Jewish person who chooses not to keep kosher, they're still Jewish, right? That's fine, but that doesn't mean that kashrut isn't an integral part of Judaism. And in the same way that each person has their own identity when it comes to their connection to their peoplehood, because we know that Judaism is much more than a religion, right? It's our ethnicity, and celebrating our Zionism is celebrating our shared culture, ethnicity, language, ancestry, so on and so forth. And so I think it's really important to not even allow that question to be asked, but also I think a lot of people also struggle to even at this point know what Zionism is, because it's been demonized so much. And I think it's simple, right? Zionism is the belief in the Jewish people's right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. It's not so complicated, right? And does that mean you can believe in other people's right to self-determination? Absolutely. So if you're just against self-determination altogether, okay, that makes sense then. But if you're only against self-determination for the Jewish people and the constant delegitimization and demonization of the state of Israel, if that's not anti-Semitism, well, then what is it, right? Congressman Richie Torres asks that question. He says, if the consistent delegitimization of Israel isn't anti-Semitism, nobody has an answer for what it is then. And that's why when we see, you know, students in the past few years, they've been flooded with BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions resolutions on their campuses for years and years and years. And they've said, you know what, we need to have a proactive way to bring forth our own legislation to help our community. So they started using the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which is adopted by the United States by 30+ governments, many institutions, so on and so forth, as the most widely accepted definition, working definition of anti-Semitism. And you see students now all over the country in a coordinated manner trying to get these definitions passed in their, whether it's student governments, through their administration, so on and so forth. And for example, at UC Santa Cruz, I think several years ago, they were one of the first campuses that tried to pass this type of resolution. Now, the student government not only did not pass the resolution, therefore claiming they're not against anti-Semitism, which is just strange altogether. 2 days later, there are swastikas found all over the campus, right? So when tensions around Israel rise, it every time leads to very sheer, clear, very direct anti-Semitism, like a swastika, like boycotting kosher foods, you know, and making Jewish students feel unsafe on campus. And so I think it just goes without saying that the two are deeply entrenched, and these are the questions they want us to be asking to sever that part of our identity. And we need to say absolutely not. Like, you don't get to tell me, just like I don't get to tell you what parts of your identity you get to keep, don't get to keep.
I think that's a fantastic distinction that you're making, right? Like, so let's just back up, because there was a lot of information that you just shared. So Shira is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, in part, that the same way kashrut is part of a Jewish identity. If you choose not to keep kosher, fine, Beseder, that's your choice. Zionism is part of Jewish identity, Jewish culture, certainly all of the different examples that you gave us. Here's my question too, because I want to circle back. I know that there's so much work to be done on regarding language, right? So I've spoken here at the shul about abrogation of terminology, nomenclature, terminology such as occupation, use the term delegitimization, colonization, etc. Okay, fine. So can you tell us, I'm thinking about this question again, based on my own experience checking in with students of mine, former students of mine who are on the college campus. We have seen an uptick, I believe an uptick, and you're pointing out to us, no, yes, it's an uptick, but it was here, and we should keep that in mind. But we see it in two realms on the college campus. I want to ask you, what makes it most uncomfortable for the Jewish students? We see it certainly coming from upper administration, right? That is to say, we hear comments such as before a congressional hearing that calling for the genocide of Jewish students is not problematic at the Harvard campus, MIT campus, etc. We've seen subsequent resignations of presidents of major institutions, right? Okay, so we know that. We know Harvard has ingrained anti-Semitism that we saw not only through Christine Gay, but we also see it through professors who encourage their students to go to pro-Palestinian rallies, etc. My question to you is for the Jewish students who are there, is it more upsetting for them when they see this anti-Semitism expressed through the administration, or when they see it expressed through their peers who are demonstrating against Israel? What makes it most difficult, and which of those two is more of your priority?
Sure. So I would say that the students, to simply answer that last piece, the students are the priority, right? Faculty are full-fledged adults that you would think would be able to behave with moral clarity. We do work with faculty on a number of campuses, and we have a partner organization called the Academic Engagement Network that works to do some of the work similar to us, but on the faculty and administration level. We really believe in like ubiquitous customization when it comes to every campus. Like each campus, each student population, each administration is just so deeply different. So we don't really have like a one-size-fits-all approach, but rather take each situation as is and build a strategy around the people involved. I think that what's happening with the students is more concerning for the long haul, right? The fact that there's a student at in the School of Social Workers or the law school, I can't remember, at Hunter College in New York City, that out loud in their class said, I absolutely would never have Jewish clients. They're colonizers. And that's that's scary, right? Like that's your peer, that's the person you're supposed to be having academic, good faith, political debate, academic discourse with. And you can't do that because they're telling you that they would never serve you and your people because of something that's happening thousands of miles away that has nothing to do with it, right? So I think it's concerning for the long haul, the way we see people, college students behaving in a way that really just doesn't make a lot of sense at times. I think where the concerning behavior from the faculty comes in is that students are supposed to be able to rely on their professors. They're supposed to be able to go to them and come to them with concerns, seeking out advice, learning from them. They're supposed to look up to them, right? So at Stanford, when a week after October 7th, a TA in his class says out loud, all right, all of the Jewish students, raise your hand. Go to this side of the room, put your stuff down. Now walk to the other side, and then announces to the class, this is what Israel did to the Palestinians, which first of all, doesn't really make a lot of sense, but that aside, that is deeply disturbing. That is discrimination on the basis of their religion, and that's where Title VI comes into this. And many lawsuits that have been filed pre and post October 7th, the campus is creating hostile and unsafe environments for Jewish students. And I think that piece is really important, right? The legal responsibility of these schools. Or at Indiana University, the student I work with is pretty vocal on Twitter, and he's a Jewish Zionist, not posting anything extreme. In a class that he is not in, we found out that a professor pulled up his Twitter profile and Instagram in class on the big board and said, this student is a student on our campus, X is his name, he is a Zionist and he is paid by Zionists to spread misinformation on campus, watch out for him.
Whoa.
And I have so many stories. I could sit here for 6 hours to tell you more stories like this. That's really insane, right? And because of the work that we do with our students and the communication and the coordination and the strategies we can provide and the relationship with the administration, we're able to then, create solutions, get a professor fired when necessary, and hold people accountable as they should be. And it's not always easy, obviously these situations with the congressional hearing was very public and very, it just got a little bit out of hand, especially with the situation at Harvard. But at the end of the day, people need to be held accountable. And I think that's really an important piece of what the students also really are seeing, that they want, and they're going after it. And they're calling out anti-Semitism when they can, but then they're given so much backlash for calling out their own bigotry. And the Jewish community is the only minority that is not allowed to name what their own form of hate is, right? No one would ever say that to another minority group. And so I think something positive that's come from this is we've seen that Jewish students and their allies, right? There are a lot of people not in the Jewish community that are pro-Israel and really believe in Israel's right to exist for whatever reason that is. And I, in my role, get to do a lot of work with communities, the Black community, the Asian community, Hispanic community, and get to help offer our resources and extend the work we do beyond the traditional pro-Israel base. So to answer your question, I think it's scarier for the long haul about when students are behaving in this manner. But I think it's more like imminently scary for them when it's a teacher and they feel more unsafe in that situation.
So I'm gonna ask you one follow-up question that has to do with the student body. And then I'd like you maybe to share with us one of your success stories in your work with the ICC. Can you tell us, because not necessarily everybody knows, what does it mean to be woke, and how does that play into everything that's going on vis-a-vis the world in anti-Semitism?
So I'm not an expert in Islam, but I think the role of DEI and the role that's played, especially in the last 5 years or so on campuses, also is a big part of this conversation. Again, I'm not a DEI expert, but we see diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on campuses and companies really all over, which, that sounds lovely, right? Like, we support diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the whole premise of it really excludes the Jewish community, because Jews are often perceived as white and successful, even though we know that not all Jews are white and not all Jews are successful. But I mean, I think the basic premise of wokeism and the problem with seeing big picture is that years ago, there used to be good faith political debates as welcome, right? People would bring controversial speakers to their campuses, and people would get mad, right? When Columbia brings in, I don't know, a very inflammatory speaker, people are mad, but they're allowed to bring him because of free speech. So the students would fight back about that. But today, it's just, you're in one of two boxes, right? You're either oppressed or you're an oppressor. And that's it. That's what wokeism is. You are either oppressed or you're an oppressor. And if you're white, if you're Jewish, you're an oppressor. And so nobody really cares what else you have to say about your identity. So what we have to do is to tell our story better, right? We need to get outside of the Jewish bubble that we often live in, especially on these campuses. And I don't blame these students for feeling that way because they're often excluded from different groups, right? I spoke to a student at Columbia last week who transferred from Boston College, and she's a big Democrat, super involved in Democratic politics, and wanted to get involved in Columbia College Dems. So she joins the group chat, and all they're talking about is how Israel committing genocide and that they're colonizers. And she's like, I'm not joining this group. You know, like, what does that say about the way that Jewish students are consistently not welcome in spaces unless they shed a part of their identity? And I think that it's just gotten to a place where it's really out of hand on college campuses, but I do have a lot of hope because of the type of students we work with and, you know, the ways that we're able to continuously find, it is hard, I'm not gonna pretend like it's easy, and I have a lot more stories like this that really leave you feeling like, okay, like I've lost a little bit of hope, but then I spend time with, you know, the student leaders that I truly believe are gonna go on to be, you know, the next president, United States presidents, congressmen, heads of law firms, you know, leading tech and agricultural initiatives and sustainability initiatives. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. So in my role, I oversee something that's called Geller International Fellowship. And the fellowship annually selects 40 elite student leaders from a diverse range of college campuses across the United States, like really diverse. I'm talking about historically Black colleges in Georgia, Ivy League universities, state schools in Oregon, Christian colleges, small liberal arts schools, really bringing together a very wide range of people with different backgrounds, different political ideologies, so on and so forth. And they participate in this year-long fellowship where it culminates in a 10-day mission trip to Israel and to the United Arab Emirates to learn about the Abraham Accords. Because the Abraham Accords is one of the most, you know, historic diplomatic successes in the century. And it's something that I think we don't talk about enough, and we were starting to talk about it in a way that was so refreshing for these students too, that their only connection with Israel on campus has really just been defending themselves and talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which isn't the whole picture, right? It's important, and those conversations need to be had. But there's a lot of change happening in the region. And one of the ways things have changed the most, I would say, circling back to the very beginning since October 7th, is that, you know, we are building this program all around hope and peace building and, you know, meeting people from different Arab countries. And then October 7th happens. And then we have to take 10 steps backwards because it's really hard to talk about peace in the Middle East right now.
So I'm gonna say to you that I can set my watch. I love what you just shared. I can set my watch and tell you, because you're making a reference in terms of chronology, that every 10 years we have this problem. 48, 56, 67, 73, 82, etc. You just referenced 2014, it's now 2023 for October. Every 10 years, I tell everybody, I'd say every 10 years there's going to be a blow up in the Middle East. You're saying that the problem existed before, we now have this exacerbation of tension, you double down your efforts. College campuses, for example, the University of Michigan received a $20 million gift to do further education and to bring in Jewish scholars to be integrated into the college campus, etc. But the truth is that the problem on the college campus is getting worse, not better. And so my question is, how does this end of the day, simple, like give me 2 lines, how do we fix this thing? And can you do it immediately, please?
I think that we continue to stay strong in our conviction and our identities, and to understand and have moral clarity, and to find the many people out there, I think that, you know, we used to refer to like the 80%, right? We're not encouraging students on campuses to go to Students for Justice in Palestine and convince them to become Zionists. That's not the point, right? Why would we do that? We're not doing that. And we respect their story, their narrative, and their identities just because they don't respect ours. We need to continue building bridges with other communities in a way that is authentic and building coalitions, broad coalitions with people that want to understand the Jewish story that includes Israel as part of that story, to bring them into our communities in a way that, you know, also respects their narrative, and to continue to provide opportunities for people to really understand what Judaism is, because I think we're really misunderstood people. And I think we're doing that, and I really do think we're moving the needle slowly, very slowly, one day at a time. You know, we host a conference in Washington, D.C. each year, and we opened it up last year. In 2 hours, we had to add another 100 spots and speak to one of our stakeholders and say there is a dire need for more resources, more tools, and most importantly, a network, right? These students believe in that they're not alone, and I think that's the most important thing we're doing, is showing them that they're not alone. They have students that and peers across the country, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students that want to support each other and be really like a support system for one another that they might not have in their individual campuses. There are professors out there are professionals out there are politicians out there are lay leaders, there are clergy. There is a massive community we have that wants to support you know, what these students are facing with on a daily basis. And we need to remind them that they're not alone, because they're not. And we need to remind them that there is hope, and like peace and you know, dignity for all the human beings being affected by these tragedies is not lost. And you know, all of the experts we speak to in foreign affairs really strongly believe that the Abraham Accords will continue, will go on, and because that was a big question, right? Like everyone was saying, okay, Saudi Arabia was going to join the Abraham Accords, and that's partially why Hamas decided to do October 7th. Maybe that's part of it, I don't know. But I think that the relations in the Middle East are much stronger than we realize. And you know, you're not going to read Al Jazeera and Haaretz and hear about the conversations that Bibi Netanyahu and King whatever from Saudi Arabia are happening, but they're happening. And we need to just keep providing our students with the resources and the network to make them feel supported.
Shira, I want to thank you for sharing with us so beautifully this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, Shira Wallach, Israel, reference not throwing Ben Aminadav, who continued to walk through the waters despite them not opening immediately and having the strength. We wish you continued strength and blessings in your work on behalf of the Jewish community. We thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.